Hi, everyone. Good to see a full room. Good to be back in Singapore. My name is Simon Baxis. I lead go-to-market and business development for Web3 at Google Cloud. And I have the pleasure of fireside chatting today with Bryan Pellegrino. Not to be mistaken with the sparkling water, Bryan is the CEO and co-founder of LayerZero Labs. Bryan, welcome. How are you?
Fantastic. Glad to be here. Excited.
Yeah. Well, it was mentioned before, and we announced a pretty fun and exciting partnership earlier in the week, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. I will say this is a bit ironic personally for me. When we first started our efforts at Google Cloud about 2.5 years ago or so, and spun up the team, we started referring to ourselves internally as LayerZero. You know, sort of this like base infrastructure layer that the Web3 ecosystem can build on. And I went as far as adding it to my Twitter profile and my LinkedIn tagline and all that. And then all of a sudden, you guys came out with out of nowhere with a massive funding announcement. And it was funny, like all of a sudden, people started pinging me on Telegram. They're like, "Hey, are you leaving Google? Are you joining LayerZero? Are you going to work for them?" So needless to say, my LinkedIn is back to just Web3 at Google Cloud, but it's funny that we're talking about it here today on stage, the partnership between our two organizations. That said, Bryan, why don't we start with just a little bit about what LayerZero actually is, a little bit about your background and what you guys have been up to.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, Bryan, one of 3 co-founders, CEO of LayerZero Labs. LayerZero ultimately, the way that I think about it in the most reduced framing is when you think about a packet on the internet, it's literally 2 computers, right? It's compute, generate an array of bytes, and then ingest it, like figure out what to do with it. LayerZero at its core is just that. It's arbitrary contract invocation with a bytes array. And what we do with that packet on the internet is that's how we all watch Netflix and talk on, do all of these other things that we do regularly. Like the goal of LayerZero was, at the time, everybody was building a bridge. You could transfer value, but to us it seemed kind of insane. Value transfer is just a special case of generic messaging. So our goal was build the primitive for generic messaging that can really be that base packet. That could be anything of moving, transacting data around chains. And yeah, it's been exciting.
Yeah, well, obviously you guys have done very well for yourselves in the past couple of years. Why was it particularly interoperability that you chose kind of as the problem to solve?
To be honest, we kind of stumbled into it. So we didn't set out to even start a company, let alone solve the problem. We're technologists, all 3 of us. We were tinkering. At the time, Binance Smart Chain had just launched, and you were kind of getting inundated with messages every day of more volume than Ethereum, more users than Ethereum. And as somebody who had been in the space for 9 years at the time, there's other chains existed, but nobody actually used them, right? So this was new and interesting. And so we started to say, okay, what could you do with a high throughput execution environment and something that's just different. And so we built for ourselves a toy game that was, gameplay would live on this chain and all of the assets would be entirely ephemeral. And then on completion, you would basically move those assets over to Ethereum. So this could be mint and NFT, whatever. And so we built this thing just as a toy for ourselves and realized there was no way to trigger events on both chains without a central coordinator. And we're like, well, that sucks. But bridges exist, so surely somebody solved this. Looked at the state of bridges at the time and were horrified, truly horrified back then. We're just okay, we'd not do any of that. And ultimately that led us to starting to build this transportation layer. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a big problem to solve, and that toy now has become obviously one of the most widely used, cross-chain messaging protocols in the world, and that's, very exciting. I mean, it's interesting how we actually began our conversations here in Singapore at Token 2049 exactly 12 months ago. So we have now come full circle and get to announce sort of what we're working on, 12 months later. Why don't we unravel that a little bit and talk about sort of the 3 key components of the partnership?
Yeah, sure. So, the first part, the part that everybody saw, kind of big announcement, is that Google Cloud is now running an Oracle on LayerZero, which means, verifying messages across the network, which is amazing. For us, I think it's important to talk about, why is that interesting? So this, when we built LayerZero, we really took kind of this radical architecture approach at the time, which was that everybody else had this approach of we're gonna have a structure, a chain, some monolithic stack that lives in the middle, and we're making a bet on that validation layer being able to scale. And we took kind of the approach that no validation methodology existing 3 years ago would exist in 5 to 10 years. Like, it was just too nascent. And also that application demands are wildly different. So if you think about the needs, security, like when you think about this, it's really just a line of cost versus security. Like, that's what an application is thinking about. If you can get more security for a cheaper cost, you'll always take it. And so you have this curve that you would price security at. And it's very different when you're dealing with multi-$100 million liquidations or tens of billions of dollars of real-world assets versus like 5-cent in-game items and NFTs, right? Like, they're just drastically different demands, and applications have different requirements for that. And so we took this approach that we're a validation layer agnostic that would develop over time. And I think what we've seen that has been incredibly important is again, like, you want applications that, like, if you think about the best possible trusted option, for us, there's like an organization like Google Cloud. When you think about the world and sort of like what Google is responsible for in terms of like data and security and everything from HTTPS, just like across the board, right? Like, applications want that, and when you have applications who demand like the fully other end of the spectrum, like, it's there, right? So all of this lives within there, and we think that's like incredibly powerful to have. The second part of the partnership has really been this. Google's product, Google Cloud, of blockchain node engine, right? Of being able to run RPCs in nodes. We are one of the largest consumers of RPC calls in the world, I think, at this point. With the volume we're doing something like 50 to 80 billion RPC calls a month. You look at chains like, look at Arbitrum, for example. I think we're 5 or 6 of the top 10 gas-consuming contracts on the chain. So in terms of like actual message delivery, submission to chain, consuming RPC data, we do a lot of it. And I don't know if anybody has worked regularly with RPC data, but RPCs are rough right now in the industry. It is very hard to have reliable access to them, to have it at scale, to have something that is going to be consistent. So being able to leverage that and use that internally for, again, all of these RPC calls that we're doing, everything else, that's incredibly powerful. And then on the third step is back to this concept of optionality, this full spectrum of cost versus security. Like, we have had probably 50 to 100 groups of some of the largest orgs within the industry, some of the largest applications who want to run and own their own infrastructure, who really right now have not been able to, largely because it's too onerous, right? So one of the things we've been co-developing that we're exciting to see come out is the ability to run an Oracle or Relayer in a single click on GCP and basically do that immediately. And so that, in collaboration with Essence from our side, will make it very, very easy for this. There will be hundreds of validation options within LayerZero, which ultimately gives the end developer the most optionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're obviously incredibly excited about that. And if I may summarize, I think on the first point in terms of us running an Oracle on LayerZero, that really all kind of comes down to trust. I think the second point about the RPC infrastructure really comes down to scale and resilience, right? And number 3, in terms of kind of distribution and make other oracles and relayers easily deployable on a cloud provider like Google, I think really comes down to that optionality angle, right? And I think these are sort of like the core pillars, if you will, of the partnership. But I think maybe just to make it really simple, like some folks may have seen the branded taxis outside, right? LayerZero and Google Cloud. And it's actually a very good analogy, right? Like, if you think about it, LayerZero is basically this, this taxi fleet, if you will, right? And we as Google are basically coming in and saying, like, is the passenger that got in that taxi actually, the passenger that he says that or she is, and is that their first name, is that their last name, et cetera? We're basically verifying that, right? And I think it just makes a lot of sense. And in general, like, if you think about this partnership, I think there's a very clear fit between the two organizations, right? Obviously, the teams have been leaned in from both sides over the past couple of months, 12 months. We've been working together very closely and have certainly enjoyed that. But I think the core values really align in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here, right? Like, I think in order for this space, our space, to reach 1 billion users, which I think everyone in this room wants, right? We all want that. We want sort of mass adoption. At least 5 things need to be true, right? I think number one, we need resilient and sustainable technology and infrastructure. I think number two, we need to enable proper interoperability between the different ecosystems that exist. There's, seems like a new ecosystem every week, and so that's important for those ecosystems to communicate with each other. Number three, we need to provide optionality to have sufficient decentralization, right? I think that's a very core component to this entire space. Number four, we need to create quality, easy to use developer tooling that can actually scale. And lastly, number five, I think we need to do all of that with a very high level of trust and integrity, right? And what's interesting about this partnership in particular is that it cuts across all five of those areas, right? Which I think makes it, incredibly exciting. I'm curious from your perspective, if you think sort of about the future and now what this means for customers, developers, users, hopefully joint users and developers of our ecosystems, how does that really impact those communities?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, ultimately it comes down to this. Like at the end of the day, there is massive demand for a trusted validation across chains. Like ultimately, there are a large number of applications who have demand for that like broad spectrum application sort of design space. But having somebody who there's a lot of developers, they just want it to work, right? They want it to work. They want to know who is on the other side, that the sort of the data integrity is there. And I think more than that, when you talk about people outside, as much as we all, again, I've been here for 11 years. I love this space. To a lot of incumbents who are existing in this sort of traditional enterprise institutional space, this is still a toy. It's for better or worse. We're not going to convince them to use at least now. Again, years out, maybe we're not going to convince them that this structure that exists here is safe and have them be able to go through all of these steps and compliance, everything to do that. Google Cloud is a name that they know, they work with across huge spectrums in many cases. That is something having a trusted entity where they're able to rely on, I think is incredibly powerful for opening the doors to allowing people to take the first steps to lean in, and I think that matters a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it coincides really well with our mission, right, which is to be the best place for Web3 developers to build, blockchain-based applications, blockchain-based services. And so if you think about a developer that's building a decentralized application right now, they could come to us for managed RPC infrastructure because that's basically a prerequisite, right? They could come to us for accurate on-chain data streams, right? Because you also probably need that if you're building a dApp. And now, it's probably inevitable that dApp is also going to have to communicate cross-chain. And the fact that, that same developer can also use, the Google Cloud Oracle on LayerZero to provide safe cross-chain communication that's trusted, I think is a really big value prop, and that's sort of another tool in sort of the Google Cloud Web3 belt, in partnership with you guys, which is very exciting. It does sort of maybe beg the question, and I think we get this a lot, right? It's sort of the centralization versus decentralization dilemma. So I'm curious, and we obviously have thoughts on this, but curious to hear yours first on how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the entire premise of when you build a permissionless system, there's going to be a lot, in an ideal world, in a positive outcome, there's almost infinitely number of options within there for application developers to choose from. And so I think if you want to maximize on decentralization, Polyhedra is the first ZK-like client that does the entire Ethereum consensus, right? So literally zero-knowledge proof of every single signature from entire ETH consensus, right? First in the world to do that. If that's what you want, that exists within LayerZero. If you want, again, a trusted entity, an entity something like that exists, right? So I think from us, the entire point is you want to give the end applicant, I shouldn't actually, not even I don't want to. It should not be on me to make decisions for the end developer of what is the right choice for them, what is the right amount of security, what is the way that they price it, what is the thing that they're looking for. That should be up to the end developer. And again, in a permissionless system, more options is always better. So I think from our end, we want to be the place that has all of these options, that provides the spectrum, and the end developer is able to build and choose what they want to use. I'd be curious to hear on your guys' side, like how does an org like Google Cloud think about decentralization, right? How do you guys approach that in the space? Like generally, how do you think about it?
Yeah. And it's a topic that comes up often. I think it all comes down to optionality, right? I think the space isn't sufficiently decentralized today. Like if you really think about it, a lot of the infrastructure that exists, a lot of the tooling that exists, sits in most of the time one single region in one single cloud provider, and that's no matter how much you abstract it is not, it doesn't solve the problem, right? And so when we think about entering the space, I think we want to provide that optionality for multiple protocols, for multiple technologies, developer tooling, et cetera, to be a piece of the puzzle, but maybe not the entire puzzle, right? And I think that's kind of what we're doing here with LayerZero is, we're running this Oracle. People can use this Oracle, but they're absolutely not precluded from choosing a different Oracle or running their own if they'd like to, right? Or relying on different RPC infrastructure that the Oracle sort of verifies against. And so as long as I think we can continue to provide that optionality, but balance it with, again, resilience, with availability, with actual scale is sort of where we need to get to. And it needs to be, technology that works. Again, like we keep talking about the sort of billion user problem or sort of this goal that the whole entire industry needs to achieve. And I would argue that some of the technology is not even ready for a billion users, right? From like a scale perspective and an infrastructure perspective. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it, and hopefully we can again introduce that additional resilience and optionality for the industry.
Amazing.
Yeah. So again, really exciting. We are kind of running close on time here. I do have maybe one question for you. Who do you think is going to win the F1 race this weekend? Is it going to be Max Verstappen or Max Verstappen?
Sounds like I don't have a lot of optionality here. We'll go with Max Verstappen.
I tend to agree. All right, well, thank you everyone for listening. Hope everyone has a fantastic rest of the conference. Thank you, Bryan. It's a pleasure.